Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 16th audio chat on the Q News Patriot Rumble channel series. I'm the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. Over time, Patriots, there's been a lot of sifting and sorting as we go through what amounts to a full-fledged espionage war conflict all around the world. We have different factions of government working against one another, or ostensibly so anyway. We have different nation states that are beginning to accuse one another of criminality. And we have leaking now going on even down into the Patriot community to show that all is not necessarily as it seems. Now, we've known for a long time, if you followed this program and others like it for a while, that a lot of this comes back to the cold, hard connections, and that some of those connections oftentimes are difficult to swallow. Just recently, with the explosivity of this Israeli-Gaza conflict that has come out and gone public in the last 48 hours, and remember, it began on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War of 1973, we saw a number of individuals in the U.S. Congress lobby on the conservative Republican, what you would call more of the we the people side, actually lobbying for the military-industrial complex, the military war machine. Among them were Jim Jordan, Robert F. Kennedy, Hakeem Jeffries, and others. So understanding then that there's a lot more at play in the world, we have to ask ourselves a number of different questions. One of those questions is, what sort of proof can we rely on to be the bona fide facts? I think a lot of us could say that firsthand sources, research, personnel lists, ledgers, manifests, itemization statements, receipts, right? We call it receipts or the sauce a lot of times in this awakening movement, referring, of course, to source. But I think we also have to remember that, just as the Congress has pointed out recently in the public eye, banking and financial records are extremely important. Where do people put those things that are most precious to them? Where do people hide their money? How do they store it? How do they pay one another off? How do Chuck Schumer on the left and Mitch McConnell on the right scratch one another's backs and then go to dinner together, or maybe end up on the same island, right? This is how this process, of course, has played out for a while. Now, a lot of people have heard about Mr. Mike Gill. I'm extremely excited to bring Mr. Gill to all of you today for part one of a multi-part discussion that we are going to have on exactly these issues: money laundering, financial criminality, and sort of facing pictures, if you will, or allowing the emerging pictures that are coming from our piecing together of the evidence to fully flesh themselves out, regardless of our personal opinion of them. Extraction in the emotional process and evaluation of things from a logical standpoint really is important for the awakening and for humanity as a civilization for a number of reasons. One of which is they've weaponized our emotions against us. MK Ultra, the psychological warfare campaigns of the CIA going back to as early as 1951 here in the United States of America have done nothing but generate a large-scale mass population egregore, a fear complex over the civilization of not only the United States, but really we the people everywhere. And it is that frightfulness, that compunction for safety, security, and pleasure that they have weaponized against the human being. And that's really not fair. We as a civilization are capable, and we should be experiencing so much more, and the calmness and centeredness in our mind and an appreciation of the facts without sort of a judgment against those facts is extremely important. Mr. Gill is a former New Hampshire gubernatorial candidate who actually was targeted for assassination by the deep state and I believe was twice attempted to be murdered. Mr. Gill was offered an extremely large settlement. I believe it was by the IRS, but I may be corrected on that in a moment, on the order of $50 million USD to turn over evidence and sign non-disclosure agreements that would forever sort of seal the documentation and the connections that he had woven out there on the internet. The trouble, I think, is that Mr. Gill's information comes as a sledgehammer, if you will, into the consciousness of mankind, especially here as we learn in the United States and around the world just how deep the infiltration goes. Taken primarily out of the Pandora Papers, which was the final installment of a three-part, multi-years-long document leak, beginning with the Panama Papers, the Paradise Papers, and concluding with the Pandora Papers. And it's worth noting that even the entity Q references Hunter Biden's laptop as the, quote, Pandora's box of financial connection for the elite. It ties together, I think, a picture that is extremely pertinent and poignant, and maybe hard to see at first, but that makes total sense, and explains a lot of the disinformation and misinformation war that we're all a part of. So I know that's a long introduction, Mr. Gill. I appreciate you taking a moment to come on today. I know that your safety and security and that of your family is paramount. We will not be seeing video of you today, and I'm letting the audience know that. But either way, I very much appreciate you being here.
Thank you. And there'll be a time where I'll be more present. But you've got to remember, my enemies are watching everything. And even a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I'm not giving them even that at this point. I had 3 murder attempts within 13 days as I ran for president. I'm sorry, for governor. I want to tell you 2 of those attempts were caught on security camera, and the FBI and the DOJ have that evidence. It's been documented and labeled and given to the Attorney General by U.S. Attorney Lullen. So
incredible.
So let me go ahead. I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, I kind of want to get into that, because for someone to be targeted at the level that you have, and you've been at this for a long time, I believe since 2007, 2008, in those days.
That's correct.
You know, and prior to what you could call the awakening or the spread of truth online or the rise of the podcast space, whatever terminology we want to apply to the current shift in information dynamics around the world, the name Mike Gill wasn't necessarily a household name except in certain circles. And so I'd like to start there if we can. You know, who is Mike Gill, and where, I guess, did you come from with the background that you have, and why is your story, I think, so significant right here, right now, as we go through what is perhaps the most pivotal moment in American history in multiple generations?
You know, I don't think that's a false statement. I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think we are in that moment of time. I know you referred to the 50 million. I did refuse that 3 different times, in writing, 1 verbally. But the first time they wrote the releases are the people who run the laundering network that the Pandora Papers dropped the money in. What I discovered was the laundering network of the deep state. 935 billion was tracked by the Pandora Papers. Drug cartels, human traffickers, corrupt politicians dumped and laundered their money in the machine that I discovered, gave it to the American people 10 years ago, and every year since. Refused settlements, tried to murder me. Refused settlements, turned around and threatened and took my business, took my home. Each and every step was not to tell you the truth. I am telling you, maybe some of this community didn't know who I was, but you can take this to the bank, okay? Every politician, every FBI, CIA, IRS agent in this country knew exactly who I was. I can tell you the Sinaloa cartel knew who I was. The Anagos cartel knew who I was. And I was coming for all of them. And so now's a good time to tell you who I was, because I'll tell you who I am. I'm somebody that won't be bought off, won't be scared off. And at this point in my life, there is nothing to lose. I am a weapon, and they know it, and I am committed. What I used to be was a young man who grew up in Salem, New Hampshire, of New Hampshire. My mother was handicapped and misformed by polio as a young girl. My father was a 6'4" fighting Irishman, a boxer, who just passed away this last April. So I came from that. My mother was the town's catechism teacher. I think they called it CCD. And every Saturday we'd have children over the house. We'd be at St. James' School. But that's who my mother was. My mother was a person of faith. And as a young man from there, I was I was 6 feet tall. I was 12 years old. And I went at 15, to a seminary. The idea of St. Francis Seminary was to be a priest in time. Over the years, I changed and what I wanted, and what I wanted to do in life also changed. So from there, in time, I got married. Not once, but twice. I have 5 children. They were all close in age, and 5 children couldn't have been any closer to their father. I was I was a football coach, basketball coach. I mean, I had a batting cage in the house. I had a half court and a full court basketball court because I also became a very wealthy man. I built the largest volume mortgage brokerage firm in United States by volume. I would work with Fannie Mae in their training videos and setting rates. So in other words, forecasting, insightfulness was my skill, which I had few skills, but that was one that I had refined. A strategy also in business that taught me how to maneuver in business, particularly in a mortgage industry that's changing as it is now. So you could see where that experience would come into play. And in horse racing, it's the competitive nature. It was my way as a young boy who grew up poor. We would look for change the last 7 to 10 days of every month because my father got paid on the 25th and we'd be broke every time. But from there, that eliteness, that wealth, and that community, I was resented. I was the last thing that they wanted because of this elite, this power. They see it as breeding. They see it as right. They see you as an interloper. And I became the king of the interlopers at the sport that they loved. And I kicked their ass and became the world champion in spite. Just so you understand the nature of telling me I can't do something. So you know what? I've done the impossible already. Twice. The fact that I'm even here and what I'm trying to do now is my experience in that mortgage company. Where was their laundering network of the deep state? In New Hampshire. Who was the owner of the mortgage company at the highest volume? Me. So this is what I'm telling you. Use your logic. I was where the laundering network was. I was a wealthy man. I attracted the Bill Shaheens. He worked for me. The Alex Walker, the puppet masters. Listen, all you've got to do is get rich and they'll find you. Okay. And that's what happened. But they put these criminals in my presence, and that was a mistake. And they have come to realize that. Now, the success in business and the wealth that I had turned around and gave me resources maybe that you wouldn't have, although we were fighting a monster. But I was preparing to fight a monster, hoping that you would rally, the people would rally behind me. So that's where I was probably worth around $400 million. I had the largest racing stable in the world. But all of that is nothing to the effort and the time that I put into this. It was my experience in horse racing that caught them cheating, fixing races, money laundering, offshore, bringing it back. And listen, Penn National offered me $25 million. You hear that in the settlement, and Liberty Mutual offered another $25 million, and I'm not even counting that in the 4 settlements. How's that? And it's all on video. So, but I was moved to that position, into horse racing. I was in New Hampshire where they built this network. They walled in the state to make it ground zero for opioid distribution, make it ground zero for money laundering, make it ground zero for manufacturing guns that they're sending over to Mexico, arming these cartels. Put it in a singular section sanctuary, walls around it and protect it. That's why they moved the DEA into Bedford, New Hampshire. That's why the police chief in Bedford, New Hampshire is Bryonsky, who was the DEA head of the Mid-Atlantic and 300 agents. What's he doing in a sleepy town of Bedford, New Hampshire, but protecting the cartel? That's exactly where they were moving El Chapo. Why? Because El Chapo was partners with Aganos. So maybe I got off track and I apologize, but it was my experience in my life that had me standing up to these bullies. It was my experience in my life and my faith that has prepared me to die. I understand fully there is no escape from this. They will not let me live. And I know the reason why I'm alive now. I think we spoke about it briefly, and that is this. And I will get you those two forms. It is a list of evidence that the Department of Justice, U.S. Attorney Llewellyn, has received from me, which is the corruption of the IRS, the judicial corruption, the child trafficking, the money laundering, the cartel. I mean, every attempted murder, they have those videos. It is listed. It is listed because Trump told Llewellyn to take it. Llewellyn turns around and gives it in writing to U.S. Attorney Sessions and Barr. The Department of Justice have this evidence. You know why I'm still alive? Because if someone shoots my ass, they go back to that evidence and say, who had motive? We have a cartel, we have Shaheen, we have laundering. Hey, and the DOJ, why didn't you do anything about it? AG Barr and Sessions, what were you doing about it? And Flynn, why did you go to meet Mike Gill and reach out through him through text while you were with the President of the United States on December 18th in the Oval Office, along with Sidney Powell, and you both reached out to me? You see?
Incredible. And we're going to get to that here in our next parts, just for the audience out there, because we've got a long, incredible discussion, I think, that we're going to have. But just to give everyone a little bit of context and to sort of tie all this together, what we have, ladies and gentlemen, is a classic example of a whistleblower come forth who was attempted to be bought off. When that was not successful, was moved into circles for handling and controlling. And when that was infeasible or no longer efficient or was too much of a consumption of what we will call deep state mafia resources, then the assassination card was rolled out. That
assassination was when I touched the cartel. That was the button. The money laundering. But when I matched the cartel with that, because as much as the deep state wanted me dead, when I put the cartel faces on the signs, they were going to murder me at that point.
It makes a lot of sense. You know, when you look at highlighting out the type of things that the Pandora Papers and the Paradise Papers talk about, you know, it's a shame that we haven't had more, I think, good, just honest citizen journalism on these documents prima facie, just because they are so compelling. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we'll get to it here in just a second, but I'm going to pull something up for the audience, is what this background of money laundering that you were talking about, the nexus of it, and why it is so important, like you said, to tie it to the specific individuals. So I've got I've got a couple of things actually pulled up here that I'm going to go over for everyone out there. A couple of different articles. You can find these online. I personally use the Onion Router browser because information regarding the Panama, Paradise, and Pandora Papers is difficult to find on the standard browsers. But this article reads... Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I don't want to interrupt you on this, but I think maybe this might help to understand. The Pandora Papers is foreign journalists, no domestic journalists, tracking the money flows of the cartels and corrupt politicians that went into New Hampshire. Understand what I discovered. And really, Pandora tracked it. I found the laundering network. That's what's on that $50 million. That's why they wanted to pay me that much 10 years ago even. What I found was how they laundered it. the LLCs, the limited corporations, the trust by controlling the banking department, the cartel owning their own banks, and then by the LLCs tracking them down and finding out what they own. Car dealerships, treatment centers, pain clinics. It is how about 68 Dunkin' Donuts? And guess what else the cartel owns that I mentioned a few days ago? And you'll notice the head of Planet Fitness suddenly resigned right after I told you that the cartel owns Planet Fitness. You're going to find out that it was established in 1980 in Dover, New Hampshire, home of Bill Shaheen. And you know who's my witness? Only the original CEO of the company that was forced out by the cartel, and ex-Governor Benson, who's now just been announced to take it over. He's inside the Pandora Papers, so's that company. How's that one?
You know, it's incredible, because at the end of the day, what you're talking about is identification of the same or the apparatus, I guess, that is sort of the same playbook rolled out at the international level, with the hiding of offshore accounts, the shell companies. You know, Shell itself, Shell Corporation, is a shell company from many nefarious activities. And
Shell game.
Correct.
It comes from the Shell game, right?
And these sorts of releases, I think, are really important to draw attention to for the mass population out there that is only now coming around to the idea that these sorts of networks exist. Taken from an article on October the 4th of 2021, actually, the Pandora Papers were being touted at that time upon their release as the biggest journalistic alliance in the history of news. They contained information on more than 330 political leaders, active leaders, and former leaders from more than 90 countries, as well as a number of con men, international businessmen, fugitives, murderers, and more. What's incredible is it also included things like Sachin Tendulkar, the cricket legend, as well as the pop music singer Shakira, the supermodel Claudia Schiffer, and Italian mobsters from the Sicilian Peninsula, right?
So what they're telling us is, think about this, ready? International criminals, international elite, drug cartels, money, human traffickers, their destination of choice in the tune of $935 billion is the state of New Hampshire. Now, what do they know that you don't? And now here's this, you ready? They never released a domestic. They built this for themselves. Your politicians, half the Senate, I guarantee you, is in the Pandora Papers. Why do you think they throw you Melendez? You know why? Low-hanging fruit. Biden, when they said, you mentioned about Q saying Hunter Biden's laptop, well, that's exactly. Biden's laptop goes to Joe Biden. Joe Biden, the money goes to who's cleaning it. That's the laundering network in New Hampshire. That's why they're at the door. And that's why Trump's in New Hampshire, scaring them to death.
You know, and New Hampshire, I think, is something that is important to highlight. And I'd like to do it more in depth in the further discussions that we're going to have. But, you know, one of the things I think is recent in everybody's memory is the failure, or the beginning failure, if you will, the cracks in the front of the dam of the United States banking and financial system. You know, we've got a system that's way over leveraged, way inflated, and is unsustainable in its current levels. And everyone knows it, including everyone in the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, and nobody wants to talk about it. But what a lot of people don't realize, and it's highlighting back to what you're talking about, is that the Pandora Papers brought out a number of laundering networks around the world. Of course, the largest one in the United States being located out of New Hampshire, and then a very hefty $300 billion being laundered through the Paradise Papers leaks through the South Dakota countryside as well.
That's correct, right? And
so we have addresses that match Silicon Valley Bank at 2.5 Beacon Street, Concord, New Hampshire. That's actually the registered address for Boston Private Bank, which is connected to Silicon Valley Bank via ownership. And 2.5 Beacon Street is also the registered address for the agent CT Corporation Systems, which is a representative of Granite Recovery Centers, infamous for Vice President Mike Pence's canceled visit to New Hampshire due to the discovery of fentanyl trafficking by the person he was going to meet, which was a former NFL player, Jeff Hatch.
hold on. That was my evidence that stopped that plane that I gave to Lullen. Trump stopped that plane. I set that up. Pence was meeting Anagos, who owns the treatment center, Granite State Recovery, who's in the Pandora Papers. And it was released by a couple of reporters. They were all attacked. Now, so Sununu was going to be there. We had them all. We would have had the money laundering. We would have had the cartel and everybody. And somebody turned Pence's plane around. That was my evidence. That was my setup. And how about this? Just so everybody knows it true, I did the video, told everybody was going to happen the day before and posted it, and it's still up. How's that?
Incredible. You know, two and a half Beacon Street.
How's this for a coin flip? You ready? The plane won't land. Now make that call.
You know, what's amazing is the evidence is on point, and it of course highlights out there for everyone. You know, along in this journey, there's a lot of people that follow this program that sort of understand that checkered pasts or outright pasts of criminality on both sides of the aisle are being highlighted in this process. We have testimony on record from a former intelligence official in the U.S. intelligence community discussing Mike Pence's involvement in a very large-scale organized kidnapping ring in Washington, D.C. that would have been directly connected into this Northeast corridor and out through Eastern Canada and into the North Atlantic. And the testimony was very compelling with specific dates, names, times, locations, etc. And the individual in question, according to their credentials, would have been very credible. You know, and what's amazing about, you know, all of this and how it ties back is how global this corruption really is coming back to New Hampshire. And that's one of the things I'd like to highlight, I think, when we're talking about, you know, you get patriots out there. What are the Pandora Papers? What are these documents? What is a money laundering network? When we say cartels, what do we mean by that?
I think what we've got to do is go over, when I say I caught the laundering network, it's the mechanism and the explain of doing this, meaning the IRS is involved in this. The Treasury Inspector General's office is protecting the IRS. You see what I'm saying? The Department of Justice is running protection on this. So in other words, it involves the banking department. It involves the banking commissioner. It involves the revenue aspect within the state who would be taxing in auditing. They control, in this network, federal, state, auditing, all levels, all entities. Nobody sees anything with a corporation that started by Gardner, who approved it, the Secretary of State, who immediately resigned after the Pandora Papers, the banking commissioner, Jerry Little, who created the bill for the Pandora Papers. When they were released in October of 21, he resigned just like Gardner. Witness number one, number two, to get inside the laundering network, but also gives you Shaheen, gives you Sununu, gives you maybe O'Keefe and Day, gives you the cartel. So one direction into that gets everybody. And if you want to take the cartel direction, because this guy Aganos has been arrested more than Capone, you put him in there, right? And all of a sudden, you go, hey, this guy's been arrested a dozen times. How does he own treatment centers, hospitals, casinos? See, bang. So there's multiple ways in right now, and it's in those avenues. Finance.
Well, and what's amazing is the finance is something I think patriots out there are realizing is truly an interconnected global interdependent system. You have a financial structure around the world that allows for the types of mafioso activities that your evidence has described and ironed out, that a lot of different unearthings, if you will, in the last 10 years or so that are only now beginning to get traction in the information space are starting to showcase to the world the types of activities that are really possible. You know, 2.5 Beacon Street, we were talking about that address just a moment ago. It's located in Concord, New Hampshire. 2.5 Beacon Street also happens to be the registered address for a company out of Hong Kong that's called Morninggate Casa, New Hampshire. Casa, of course, being the extension of the child adoption services. And we know that child trafficking is an extremely large component of
here's
the deep
deal.
state
You ready?
criminality around the world. Go ahead.
I'll tell you this, and I hate to interrupt, but sometimes I don't want you to miss that point. Ready? The cartels are your child traffickers. They're not separate business. They own that business. They carry. That's what's coming across now. Now, the family court system in the federal government, snatching, taking kids and putting them into the system to steal and rob. Well, that's also part of that. But don't the cartel snatches that business. This is a business. This is an industry, even this of corruption. And they turn around and structure it as a business. So this is your end. See, for instance, they're letting the Mexican cartels come across our borders. Do you know why they're coming across our borders? All 8 million of them? Because we just went from opioids, like what they grew in Afghanistan, what they grow in Colombia, and we moved to fentanyl. Cheaper, man-made, we don't need you. But seeing you've been a good partner all these years, you know what we're going to give you? We're going to give you the fentanyl street business. We're going to open our gates up. We're going to flood our country. We're going to flood our cities with these migrants in the Mexican the cartels. And they're going to control your streets. Your crime is going to go through the roof because they've got to feed that habit. And it was all intentional. It was all planned. That's what that was. And now, once they own your streets, once they start burning your stores and killing you, you're going to scream for police protection, and you're going to get it. You're going to get an armed society that they created the need. Do you remember the mafia? They would sell you insurance, window insurance, but they'd be the guy that would throw the rock through the window. We're being played the same way, and by organized crime once again.
You know, it's worth highlighting, I think, for the folks out there that this connection goes very, very deep. You know, there is a master trust between Pfizer, for example, and the Northern Trust Company headquartered in New Hampshire. And there's a number of different trusts that tie back to New Hampshire. The money laundering web itself.
How about the Clinton Foundation?
The Clinton Foundation, the money to Ukraine. We're seeing the Clinton Global Initiative now opening, quote, humanitarian, end quote, operations in Ukraine, which we know is tantamount to a Haiti 2.0. But what a lot of people out there, I think, haven't made the connection with your evidence yet, and I think that they need to, is that a lot of the same money laundering junctions that are highlighted out in your evidence and in the overarching Pandora Papers investigation as a whole, it shows that a number of institutions, those same junctions that were involved in the money laundering that you've highlighted, were also involved in the COVID-19 depopulation agenda and the plan. The global launch for totalitarian control. And it was primarily, I think, financed, at least here in North America, the bureaucracy, by the same sorts of links, the same, junctions that you've highlighted out in New Hampshire. And we've, of course, have others that have come out as well.
How about this? Same links? You know who issued the money, approved the money? Banking Commissioner Jerry Little, the same guy who's not auditing the LLCs and of the Pandora paper. You see what I'm saying? They did give it out. He's the one who, and you know who took it? Sununu was front in line with his ski resort. And that they turned around with Shaheen. He was up front. You know who got the most? The cartel and all their businesses. But we talked briefly about this. I don't know if this is the time you want to go there, but there was a state senator arrested for 800,000 COVID relief fund he took fraudulently. All I'm saying is, and if you go on, we can go on, but this guy was a politician for the cartel in Shaheen. He was the front man for the cartel's casino. His wife worked in the lottery money laundering with Andy Cruz of the cartel. And then he connects now to the banking commissioner issuing the 800,000 with that guy. As soon as they mentioned Pandora Papers, he was off like a prom dress. This is what I'm telling you. So I'm telling you that never happens. That man never ever gets arrested, this Sanborn, and you can read about it. I'm telling you, that's a move against the cartel. Suddenly, Sununu's not running for president. He's not running for governor. Romney decides to resign. They throw us Menendez. We're getting close. They're compromised. They're trading and negotiating. What I'm saying to everybody is we want everybody. And what I've made it clear to this Patriot Network and all these individuals out there, and I say this, it's not your place to make the decision for the American people what they hear and what they don't hear. So do not tell me I'm the closer. I'm coming in, Mike. You're the most important witness in the country. This is the crime of the century. And tell me not to tell the truth about Flynn and O'Keefe. That don't work for me. Excuse me.
Understandably so. And in a time of awakening, I think it's important that we look at the bona fide hard lines, the bona fide connections, where things were exchanged, who funded whose education, for example. You know, Vivek Ramaswamy is sort of a case study in this particular discussion. You know, this is a guy who comes onto the scene. He's unknown. He paints himself as a conservative firebrand. He says all of the right things. He smooth talks. He appeals to the ethnic base. He appeals to the white, red-blooded American. He appeals to everybody in the middle. He also is pro-vaccine. He's pro-healthcare, etc. But when you look into the man's education, and when you look into where the man came from as far as fellowships that he held, participations that he had at the global level, what you find is that this was a man who was ancillarily connected in forms to the Soros family vis-a-vis the funding of his education in college and some of his graduate studies. And he also was featured as a young leader, a rising young leader in the science and technological community on the World Economic Forum's website. And so the same sort of, I think, playbook plays out here when we're talking about papers and we're talking about, you know, this particular set of evidence. Is we have to acknowledge that there are infiltrates, if you will. There are crossovers. There's a vested interest by the deep state intelligence community that has had sort of unfettered control of extremely high offices all around the world, to include the U.S. presidency post John F. Kennedy's assassination. This entity has a vested interest in promulgating its existence into the future. And what better way to do that than to ensure that everybody's back gets scratched in a time, in an era where so many have so little, right? That's when the whole world is hungry, a few baskets of bread becomes a very enticing and very enthralling temptation.
You know, on that, right? Know what? Now, this is, I'm speculating because you made that point. And this is a speculation, and I don't usually speculate. What I discuss is that lane of what I have as evidence. I'm not a podcaster. I'm a whistleblower. I'm a businessman who collected this evidence over time and proof. That's what I am. But I would tell you this: this economy has been driven to this. Don't forget what I was in the mortgage company. There was a reverse yield curve, meaning the short end of the market was in the negative, which is a clear outliner of inflation to come. We knew it was coming, and they fed more money into the system in 1 year than I think it was like the last 75, something like that. But that is intentional. Now take a look at a guy like Bill Gates. We've got Hillary Clinton say, re-education. You get Gates buying more farmland than anybody in the country. Now, all of a sudden, if the environment is that we're starving, the jobs, the employment, now we got 8 million more people. And then all of a sudden, they open the door to these farms and say, guess what? You can work and live on this farm. We'll house you, feed you. You work on the farm. All you've got to do is go to these classes, you know, re-education. And you were saying place from a hunger, it's a lot easier. That's why I decided that I thought that was a good time to interject that, because I believe that is the plan.
You know, without question. And we need look no further than the United Nations Agenda 2030 and the various initiatives that are being touted by the WEF and UNESCO and USAID and all of the different, dark money pools that are out there that are not so dark anymore, but yet we still know, even though we know of their existence, we still can't control them because they are sort of at that transnational diplomatic place, right? And that sort of is the structure of globalism. And it comes back to, once again, the same principles that highlight how important the papers that you have and the discussions that you've been able to put out there on the internet, how important they really are. It's the same basic principles. It's the same washing of money to reuse at a later point.
The difference here is I have evidence and proof. How about this? You get somebody else out there with a $50 million settlement signed. I mean, that's a confession. I have proof and evidence. Receipts. You see me delivered to the IRA. You see me, the FBI, the DOJ. You see me confront the cartel. I had 106 witnesses, 46 for trial, trying to get protection for 4. So in other words, I'm giving it to you. You don't have to speculate. There it is.
Precisely. And that's an important component of this, because when there will be a period, and I like to go ahead and move into a closure point for our call today in preparation for our next calls, but there's coming a period in time, and I think everyone sort of realizes that now in the mass population space, because they're becoming more aware every day of the escalating levels of criminality, the escalating levels of just on display flagrant public corruption.
Can I add just here?
Certainly.
Because you're right about that. Understand the plan, all right? SG was just telling you how you're becoming more aware. They always knew you were going to be aware. The game, the plan, is to move quickly. By the time you start figuring out, the question still got to be then, is it too late? And that is the question now. These 87,000 IRS agents, that's control. Digital currency, that's control. They're moving quickly in control by turning around and making chaos in our streets and crime, and you asking for what's going to turn into be a police state. Again, it's control. So by you figuring out what's going on, don't get confused. That's not you winning. That's not you winning. That's should scare you, because that's them saying, we're in your face. We got Clinton saying re-education before an election. We're in your face and you can't do anything about it. And you asked a whistleblower who's gone to the DOJ, the FBI, and see the resistance, see the threats, see the targeting that they get. You see what I'm saying? So this is game time, folks. We're 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. We can win. Get those names. Open that door. And let's hope President Trump does that. He's in New Hampshire. You open that door to an outrage of a country. To an outrage. It'll be like somebody turned the lights on, and guess what? We seize it all. The cartels, and we're going to talk about banks, seize their assets, seize their apartments, seize their businesses. We could use that to pay down the deficit and help some of the real victims in this country. But it's there. We win or lose here and now. And the variable is you. And they know it. Everybody knows it. That's why the big secret is, don't tell you. Remember, blackmail is the currency in Washington. If they tell you, they can't blackmail anybody. You ever get those names from Maxwell? You see? The same thing with the Pandora Papers. Okay.
Well, folks, I think that sort of sums it up in a very succinct and appropriate way. It really is about controlling the flow of information. Remember, I mean, we're up against a deep state here that has essentially had control or power in all of the significant levers of the world, to include world finance, since the days of the Knights Templar. And some people come out and say, well, how is that possible? Well, when you look at the control of information, who invented the printing press? Who financed the technology? Where were the presses located? What was allowed to be printed? In monarchical, areas and areas where you had it, royalty, for example, what one person or a handful of individuals determined the directionality of entire civilizations.
How's this? In war, what's the first thing they cut?
There you go. The
There you go.
communication pathways. And so when we look at exploding sort of into the information space, carrying through this awakening, all of us out there very interested in what these morons, quite frankly, have hidden from us, from financial entanglements to business deals to secret technologies. We know, for example, that the U.S. Congress has come out and begun a process of attempting to hold to account what amounts to secret space intelligence communities that are buried within the Pentagon budget. And so again, that comes back to the financial records. And so I guess in closing here, and what I think is important for everyone to remember, and what I'd like to leave all of you out there with, is that when we look at where the money has gone and we look at the types of things that are truly possible here in the world, if such control, if control of these monies and finances were in the power of we the people, and genuine oversight was applied, we could have an entirely different world. We could have a world that would be much more oriented towards the peacefulness and the safety and security of individuals everywhere, with a very high quality of life, because we know that we're a relatively advanced, species, and we have technologies, of course, hidden by the military industrial complex that are more advanced even still. And so, Mr. Gill, I appreciate you coming on. Any closing thoughts for everyone as we wrap it up?
Yeah. While you were talking, I kept thinking to myself, if we cut out the robbing and the stealing, we're liable to have lowered taxes, health care. You wonder why we don't have all these services. It's because they steal it, like the Green New Deal. That green was in green as the color of their money. but what I want people to understand is I was a businessman, and I moved logically, exposed them criminally, knowing exactly what I was doing, and made my way to the president of the United States, to the point where I had U.S. attorneys and the president with generals reaching out to me. There's a reason why that is. It's not because I'm special. It's because what I have is evidence, and that evidence is the deep state, is what they're afraid of. It's the one question they can't answer, and we talked about this. Joe, where'd you get the billion? See, we've got to ask every politician in this country that question, and we're going to need to have them sign it under the penalty of treason. Just a thought. Okay.
I think that's a good closing thought. Everyone out there is awakening to the levels of corruption, and they are yearning, I think, for a reckoning and a rebalancing of the proper functionality of not only our government here in the United States, but in many of the Western world nations and what you would call the former Commonwealth realms. And it is an interesting, and it can be an exciting time, I think, to be alive. Mr. Gill, I appreciate you coming on today. I'm looking forward to our second part. Stay safe. We'll be back with you again soon. Everyone, this is SG Anon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.